Bathroom Breaks and Bedtime Tales presents Grady Hart, The Haunting of Perdition, Episode 2, by Sebastian Winters. The wind stirred up the dust in the empty streets of Perdition, carrying with it the remnants of forgotten promises and broken men. Grady Hart rode in slowly, crow's hooves muffled against the hard earth. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town, turning the buildings into little more than dark silhouettes, leaning like old men too tired to stand. Grady felt the weight of the place pressing down on him, a town filled with ghosts, some of which he knew he'd find waiting for him. He didn't know what to expect. Saul Barlow had once been a friend, a brother in arms. But the war and the missing year had changed everything. Grady couldn't remember what had torn him apart, but he could feel the tension like a storm in the air. And as for Maggie, well, she was a different question. They had saved each other more times than either of them cared to count. But even that kind of bond could fray under the right circumstances. He wasn't sure how she'd look at him now. He dismounted, dust swirling around his boots as Crow snorted beside him, the horse as restless as Grady felt. His hand rested on the grip of his revolver, but he didn't draw it. Not yet. The saloon loomed ahead, the flicker of a lantern casting faint light through the cracked windows. It was the only place in Perdition that seemed alive. The saloon doors creaked as Grady pushed them open, stepping inside. The air inside was heavy with the smell of whiskey, sweat, and the kind of regret that settled into a man's bones. A few men were scattered at tables, huddled over their drinks, their eyes following him warily, but without a word. Grady's boots thudded softly as he walked across the floor, his gaze sweeping the room. And then he saw her. Maggie was crouched in the far corner, her legs folded beneath her like she'd always done. Chairs didn't suit her. She needed to feel the ground, the earth beneath her. It was just one of the many things about Maggie that Grady had never questioned. There was no need. Their bond had been forged in blood and survival, something deeper than friendship, but never needing the trappings of love. "Maggie," he said quietly as he approached, tipping his hat. She looked up slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly as they fixed on him. For a long moment, she didn't say a word, just watched him, taking in the years that had passed, the weight he carried. "Grady Hart," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "Didn't think I'd see you again." Grady slid into the chair across from her, the wood creaking under his weight. "Didn't plan on coming back," he admitted, "but here I am." "You're here for Saul." Grady nodded, his jaw tightening. "I need answers, Maggie. He's the only one who can give them to me." "Answers?" she repeated, a faint, bitter smile tugging at her lips. "You think Saul's gonna give you answers?" Grady's hand brushed the brim of his hat. "He was there. He knows what I don't." Maggie leaned back against the wall, her gaze steady but clouded with something darker. "Saul's not the man you knew, Grady, and you're not the man he remembers. Things changed after you deserted." "I didn't desert anybody," Grady said sharply, "and you know that." "Doesn't matter what I know," Maggie said softly. "Saul thinks you did. He's convinced you ran, and you've got a hell of a fight ahead if you think you're going to convince him otherwise." Before Grady could answer, the saloon doors creaked open behind him. He didn't need to turn around to know who had stepped inside. He could feel the presence like a shadow, thicken in the air. Saul Barlow. Grady's back stiffened, his hand instinctively hovering near his gun, but he didn't turn, not yet. He waited, the tension in the room building, thick and suffocating. Saul's boots thudded on the floor as he walked farther inside, his steps slow and deliberate. "Grady Hart," Saul's voice drawled, heavy with disdain. "Never thought I'd see you show your face in this town again." Grady stood slowly, turning to face him, and with a calm, steady voice, he said, "Colonel." Saul's eyes flashed at the sound of the title, something hard passing over his face. "We're not in the army anymore, Grady. War's over." Grady didn't flinch, didn't break his gaze. "Yes, sir, Colonel." Saul's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Grady waited. Outside, a bird chirped. Saul stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he looked Grady up and down. "What do you want, Grady? I don't suppose you're here by coincidence, and it ain't like you to apologize." Grady shook his head. "I would gladly apologize if I knew what I was apologizing for. I've told you before, I don't Saul's face hardened. "Bullshit. No man can do what you did and then just forget about it. And if you really don't remember, then you don't deserve to know. Don't you get it? I should have watched you hang." Grady didn't respond right away. The silence in the room was like a knife edge, sharp and dangerous. Grady could feel the weight of everything unsaid between them, the anger, the betrayal. He didn't remember what had happened during that lost year, but Saul did, and whatever it was had torn him apart. "I didn't come here looking for a fight. I thought you might have answers. I thought—" "You thought wrong. You don't belong here. Hell, you don't belong on this planet. Coming here was a mistake." Saul's expression darkened, his hand twitching near his gun. "You sit here pretending like you don't remember something, like I'm not supposed to remember either. But I do. I remember you turning your back, walking away while the rest of us bled out in the dirt. I remember all those bodies. I remember every one of their faces, and all because you're a goddamn no-good deserter." Grady's chest tightened. "That's not true." "Isn't it?" Saul growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You're the reason all them people are dead. You may as well have killed them yourself." "I don't remember what happened. The frustration of not knowing what had happened, the gap in his memory that left him defenseless against the accusations. I don't remember what happened," he said through gritted teeth. Saul's hand inched toward his revolver. "Maybe that's true, maybe it ain't, but I sure as hell remember." The room felt like it was closing in, the air thick with tension. Grady's fingers twitched near his gun, but he didn't draw. He could see the anger in Saul's eyes, the bitterness that had festered over the years. But there was something else there, too, something darker, deeper. Maggie stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "This doesn't have to end like this." Saul's eyes flicked toward her, but he didn't back down. "You're wrong, Maggie. It does." Grady's pulse quickened, his hand hovering over his revolver. "Don't make me do this, Colonel." Saul spat. "Don't call me Colonel, you lily-livered murderous traitor. You ain't got the right." Saul's hand moved, fast as lightning, reaching for his gun. Grady drew faster. The sound of the gunshots echoed through the saloon, a crack of thunder that left the room in silence. Saul's bullet shattered the mirror behind the bar. Grady's found its mark. Saul staggered back, clutching his side, his face pale as blood seeped through his fingers. He fell to the floor, his eyes wide with shock, staring up at Grady. "Private Tom Parker, Atlanta, Georgia," Saul whispered as blood bubbled in his mouth. "What about him?" asked Grady. But it was too late. Saul was already dead. Grady stood there, his chest heaving, his revolver still smoking. He stared down at Saul, the man who had once been his brother, now lying in a pool of blood. Maggie dropped to her knees beside Saul, pressing her hands to the wound, her face pale with shock. "Grady." Grady holstered his gun, his voice barely more than a whisper. "I didn't have a choice." Maggie looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. There's always a choice. Grady knew Maggie would forgive him someday, but this wasn't that day. Grady turned and walked out of the saloon, the weight of the missing year heavier on him than ever. The wind howled through the empty streets as he mounted Crow and rode out of Perdition, leaving the past and its ghosts behind. His mind drifted back to Saul's last words. "Private Tom Parker, Atlanta."